Hey everybody. There are a few things that I read this week regarding, some of the archaeological and scientific headlines. And there are actually three articles I want to share with you today. I thought they were interesting. And after discussing it with a couple of people, I feel like we should probably go into detail about a few of these things. Now, some of these headlines you've probably already heard. This first one, for example, it reads, archaeologists discover bread that predates agriculture by 4,000 years. People made a big deal about this, obviously, because the second oldest bread is about like 3,000 years younger than this one that was found. And up until this point, no one even really thought about bread making, and just assumed that after agriculture came about, that people just made flour and naturally, and they just made ovens, and it just became it evolved from there. It built up from agriculture as the jumping point. But these new discoveries are kind of throwing a monkey wrench in that. So let's take a look. So yeah, here's the article. Archaeologists discover bread that predates agriculture by 4,000 years. And you look at the picture right here. It's awesome. That's the actual fireplace that they found. And it looks like you could just go camping over there and start, just pick up where they left off so long ago. But yeah, let's get into this. This is from phys.org. Well, this particular article is from phys.org. I'm sure there are a lot of other websites that are reporting on this. But so there's this archaeological site in northeastern Jordan. I think it's called Shubeka 1. Yeah, and it's a Natufian site, which is a group that existed around 12,000 to 9,600 BC, so about 14,000 years ago. And they found, or the team archaeologists from the University of Copenhagen, University College London, and University of Cambridge, they all analyzed these food remains found in Jordan. And this article is published in the Proceedings of National Academy, pnas.org, which we'll look into that in a bit. They had their actual scientific paper published there, and they go into deeper detail than this article does. But as a quick rundown, they found of the remains of the flatbread that they found, they analyzed 24 of them. Let's just plow through it. Researchers have discovered the charred remains of flatbread baked by hunter-gatherers 14,400 years ago. It is the oldest direct evidence of bread found to date, predating the advent of agriculture by at least 4,000 years. The findings suggest that bread production based on wild cereals may have encouraged hunter-gatherers to cultivate cereals, and thus contributed to the agricultural revolution of the Neolithic period. So Neolithic period, for those who don't know, is 10,000 to 2,000 BC. And the scientists here believe that this flatbread discovery probably is what led to the advent of agriculture later on. So they went to Shubeka 1 in northeastern Jordan, which, by the way, is right around the Levant and that part of the Middle East where a lot of people say is the cradle of civilization. So this all makes sense. This is all... this shouldn't be a surprise to a lot of people. So they found flatbread that was very similar to Neolithic, the ones found in Neolithic and Roman sites in Europe and Turkey. So the thing about Natufian hunter-gatherers are that they lived in a transitional period, so to speak. So they were going from a nomadic life to a more sedentary life. And they know this because they've found several different tools, such as flint sickle blades and stone tools meant for grounding things down. And they found these at these sites. And the fact that it takes a long time to grind stuff into flour seems like it would be more tailor-made for a more sedentary type of lifestyle, because if you're nomadic, you don't have time to sit down and grind flour, basically. Again, these discoveries have led archaeologists to suspect that people had begun to exploit plants in different and perhaps more effective ways. So let's actually get into the nitty-gritty here. The charred remains under the microscope. So the charred food remains were analyzed with electron microscopes at the University College of London. What they were looking for was to make sure that it was actually bread, obviously. So, we're talking about crumbs here, like charred crumbs. So you can't just, it's not obvious unless you have a trained eye, and B, you have the tools necessary to actually look into the stuff being analyzed with an electron microscope, which I'll show you pictures in a bit. So they found microstructures in the particles of each charred food, and they noted that since bread is labor-intensive process, which again includes dehusking, grinding, and kneading and baking, they believe that it suggests that it was seen as like a more special, a special process. Like they found the bread it was important enough to go through all of that entire process. This is a clear indicator of their desire to make more of this special food, basically. So that's it for that article, but I kind of want to go into the actual pnas.org article, which I'll pull up right now. Yes, this is it right here. So, archaeobotanical evidence reveals origins of bread 14,400 years ago in northeastern Jordan. Significance: despite being one of the most important foodstuffs consumed in the modern world, the origins of bread are still largely unknown. Here we report the earliest empirical evidence for the preparation of bread-like products by Natufian hunter-gatherers 4,000 years before the emergence of blah, 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 blah. Okay, so one of the things I want to call attention to is they say the outcome of this modest process is rather versatile staple that is found today on many kitchen tables around the world. Despite its importance in modern cuisine, the origins of bread are still largely unknown. So this is still kind of a remote piece of the puzzle that they haven't really fit into the bigger picture yet. But it's a huge piece, and it calls into question a lot of things, and there are a lot of implications which we'll go over right now. So Shebeko 1 was one of the excavation sites there. There are two well-preserved superimposed buildings, the earlier one being Structure 1, which is the one that they found the fireplaces in. And it seems like it was pretty, in its heyday, it must have been a complex site, because there's a subterranean building with a carefully built flagstone pavement made of local basalt stones. So what they found groundstone tools, like I said, chipped stones, animal bones, and plant remains. So the investigations at Shebeko 1 site, they found two fireplaces at the center of Structure 1. The contents of the fireplace were left intact after its last use and were subsequently buried beneath the thick deposit that covered the building. Okay, so the reason why this 14,000-year-old site was preserved so well is because it was buried, kind of like Göbekli Tepe. It was buried under a bunch of stuff, and it was recently unearthed to reveal a very, it preserved it enough to where you can recognize that was a fireplace. So they did radiocarbon dating on the charred plant remains, and then they found it was 14.4 to 14.2 thousand before present. So it's like 12,000 around 12,000 BC, 12,400 BC, around there. So yeah, this is that's the site in relation to the rest of the Levant. So this is, you can see it's more inland than where modern day, where Jerusalem is and where Lebanon is. So it makes sense that it, the bread was found where it was found. It's not like they found it in Siberia or some random place. This is actually right next to people who were settling or passing in and out through this area. So let's go to the pictures of the actual bread. Here it is. So let's see if I can make this bigger. Here we go. All right. So to the untrained eye, this just looks like, you don't know what you're looking at here. So these little holes here, these are called matrices or matrices, and these appear in bread. Basically, you can't this kind of stuff. This is the trademark signature of what bread would look like. And again, keep in mind that these are very, very tiny pieces of bread. This is we're talking 1 millimeter right here. This zoomed in part, C, and then right here in B, this is a nanometer. This little this square in the center. So we're talking really, really tiny things that we probably, if we had discovered this 100 years ago, we probably wouldn't know what the hell we were dealing with. So I'm going to leave that up. So the plant ingredients, approximately 46% of the grains of wild wheat and barley found in the fireplaces showed bulging pattern on broken edges. So this pattern is caused when the grains are ground before charring, and it is commonly linked to food production activities such as dehusking or bulgur/flour making. The evidence therefore suggests that several large-seeded grasses were most probably used in the food preparations from Shubeko 1. Okay, so the scientists took a look at this, and they're like, okay, yeah, this is definitely food production. Somebody took the time to prepare the flour in this way, and it's incredible that they can just tell from looking at the structure of these little charred crumbs. So moving on. In this study, evidence for cereal and club rush tuber preparations have been identified at late Neolithic sites in Turkey and the Netherlands. Okay, so they found other types of flatbread-like products found in Shubeko 1 in other parts of the world, like the Netherlands. That's super far from Jordan. And then the other site in Turkey, which is a lot closer and which makes more sense. So again, this is kind of a stretch, but it is definitely in the realm of possibility that this technique of flatbread making was probably an idea that was shared amongst the people living at that time. And it probably was far-reaching. I mean, Netherlands to Jordan, that's a long, long time, especially if you're walking around back then. So there's a few interesting bits here in this study that I think really sheds a lot of light on what was going on. First off, like I said, the Natufians were a culture in transition from nomadic to sedentary lifestyle. The date at which they existed is also very interesting, 12,600 to 9,600 BC, which places them right at the beginning of the Younger Dryas, which was 10,900 to 9,700 BC. So early on in their history, they probably lived in a warmer climate because they were living pre-Younger Dryas. They lived through that cataclysm and into the time where it went from warming to that sudden cold snap period, which is very, very fascinating. And then there's no trace of them after that, so go figure. This is also significant because it means that people were making bread and likely practicing some kind of plant cultivation long before the supposed advent of agriculture. Given the evidence right now that exists in the literature, I think that the scientists in this study, they have to say that agriculture was made or was invented years later after this, and they have to label this as a precursor toward the evolution in the evolution toward agriculture. But really, who's to say that agriculture just didn't exist back then? They just haven't found anything yet, right? So I don't know. I just find it really hard to believe that people were making stuff like flatbread, which still exists today. Like, they're going through that painstaking process, but then no one was irrigating or farming. I mean, so what was going on? They just found wheat in the wild. I don't know. That seems kind of like we're not giving them enough credit. But again, I understand, because you need to find the actual evidence before that. And I guess the earliest evidence goes back about 4,000 years after they found this flatbread. Another interesting bit is given their location, which is in the Levant, their skills and their transition from nomads to sedentary lifestyle, perhaps the Natufians have a connection to the Apkallu. Now, if you're familiar with most recently Graham Hancock's work, Magicians of the Gods, there are these people, or these gods, these magicians, who brought with them these types of civilizing techniques like farming and laws and stuff like that. And perhaps these Natufians had something to do with them in some way, shape, or form. I'm not saying that they were the Apkallu. Maybe they just, in the parlance of their times, they just knew about what, let's say, for example, Oannes, or Viracocha. These guys are examples of these magicians, these civilizing figures, and maybe the Natufians knew about that. Maybe they knew about. Maybe they were part of some type of civilization back then, and not just not simply a group of people who were going from nomads to sedentary lifestyle. Maybe they were both. Maybe there were groups in both, like America, right? There are guys who hunt and people who just go to. Anyway, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself there. Let's see. Perhaps Graham was right about Göbekli Tepe as well. So Göbekli Tepe dates around this time. I think it's, what is Göbekli Tepe? 12,000 years ago. So 10,000 BC maybe, 9,000 BC. I think it's at the end of the Younger Dryas. Anyway, this place existed as a place for higher learning, or what in those days what was considered higher learning. And Graham, and among other people, I don't think it's just Graham, they believe that it was probably an institute where the survivors learned how to get by using these farming techniques in the aftermath of that cataclysm. So anyway, those are some interesting bits that I jotted down as I read the article. And for what it's worth, the conclusions that they found in this article, they believe that again, it far predates the advent of agriculture and plant cultivation, and they need to assess whether there's a relationship between bread making and the origins of agriculture, which I think is they can probably find some evidence for that. It seems pretty obvious. But again, they need to have this documented. They need to have the evidence documented before they can move forward, which is only probably just a matter of time. And it may be possible that bread incentivized plant cultivation, meaning they thought bread was so awesome, and even though it was really difficult to, create it, they still thought it was worth it, and they thought it was a valuable commodity. So so much so that they felt like, okay, let's just grow these and cultivate these and keep making it and just build our society around it. Maybe not around it, but it definitely became a staple of our society, right? So so just to encapsulate it, these group of scientists, they go to this well-known Natufian site in Jordan. They analyze 24 pieces of bread through electron microscope, and they find out it's 4,000 years older than agriculture itself. So 4,000 years, that's a long time. That's a big gap. So what? Again, that it leaves a lot of questions that should be answered. That's begging to be answered. I mean, if you guys have any questions about this, you can just leave a comment. I have to apologize about some of the pauses here. I have this stuff in front of me, and I'm trying to read through my highlighted bits. You can, again, I'll list all the links and such in the description, so you guys can read the articles in its entirety. But I'm just highlighting the stuff that I think is interesting and I think could use some clarification. So that's that for this one.